Thanks for listening to the Duval Rundown, brought to you by Injury Care Centers. Your path to recovery starts here. Now here's your host, Gus Logue.
Good morning. Welcome to episode 48 of Duval Rundown. My name's Gus Logue. I'm joined, as I am on every Thursday, by Mia O'Brien of Helmets and Heels. Today we are going to go over 2025 NFL head coach vacancies. There's only 3 spots that are officially open, but we're going to add 2 teams that we're assuming are going to let go of their head coaches, including your Jacksonville Jaguars. But first, before we get to that conversation, we're going to do a little bit of Jaguars trivia. Jacksonville's first win in Indianapolis was in October 2004. Which quarterback led the 27-24 victory over Peyton Manning and company? Was it Mark Brunell, Byron Leftwich, David Garrard, or Jonathan Quinn? You got a guess?
Yeah, it's 2004. So that's got to be the guy who went on the record in The Athletic last week, right? It's got to be Byron Leftwich.
It was indeed. It was Byron Leftwich. I thought it was a good one because of that exactly. It was a little bit timely, Byron saying that he wanted to get back in the coaching game. He's been out of it for a little bit. The Jaguars do have their season finale this week in Indianapolis, Week 18. It will be Joe Flacco or Anthony Richardson starting for the Colts. Not sure quite yet, but since it's not really a game that's worth anything except for like Hacker grumbling about the draft position afterwards during our post-game show, we figured we would jump ahead to next week because quote-unquote Black Monday is approaching, which is when, if you're going to fire a head coach, that's when you do it unless you already did it during the season. And so we're going to go over vacancies today for the Raiders, who have not fired yet Antonio Pierce, the Jaguars, who have not yet fired Doug Peterson, but then the Saints, Jets, and Bears all need a head coach. And so we're going to do our best to guesstimate and just predict where each spot is going to land with a head coach. And so let's start with the Bears. We'll save the Jags for last. Mia, what do you see going down up there in Chicagoland with Ryan Poles as general manager, moving on from the defensive system that they had under Matt Eberflus?
Yeah, so logic obviously suggests with a soon-to-be second-year quarterback in Caleb Williams, because as you noted, Gus, they're coming off of a defensive-minded head coach in Matt Eberflus, that the Bears would lean offense, much like the New York Jets. From everything I've heard and seen around the National Football League, this idea of we need a leader of men, whether he is an offensive-minded guru or a defensive-minded guru, has also been a big talking point coming out of Hallis Hall. I do think that when you hear the Bears and the Jets say it doesn't matter if they're offense or defense, it's just about leader of men who's all about the details, that is a code word for Mike Vrabel. And the truth is, I believe Mike Vrabel, if he wants to, will interview with every team that has a head coaching vacancy this offseason. I just was listening to Albert Breer on the Rich Eisen show earlier this week, and, Breer said as much too. He said that this could be, and the hope is, if you're Mike Vrabel, this is the last time he is available as a head coach. Not just because most folks do not get a third NFL head coaching gig, Doug Peterson and probably what's going to fall out there, but I also think because the hope is that wherever Mike Vrabel goes, he wants to be there for the long term. And that's why you've heard the smoke about, and I don't buy it, about the New England Patriots. I believe Mike Vrabel, as a former player, would love nothing more than to go back to where he spent the bulk of his career, if not the entire career, in New England, and try to restore that franchise. But I don't think he's trying to usurp Gerard Mayo's position. I don't believe Robert Kraft is going to fire Mayo after a year. And so because of that, this is a situation where Vrabel understands he can't go home. And so wherever he goes, he can be picky and choosy. Back to the Bears. Mike Vrabel doesn't want to go to the Bears. I'm going to tell you point blank. I do not see a world in which a guy who ultimately parted ways with Amy Adams Strunk and the Tennessee Titans because of a power struggle and because he wanted more roster control, reportedly, and had multiple blowups with Rand Carthen, the GM, and the aforementioned owner of the Titans. I don't see a world in which he's okay with the McCaskey family, Kevin Warren's omnipresent involvement as a president, and then also having to have a general manager in Ryan Poles, who, quite frankly, if things continue to go south, his job is on the line as well. And so that's where I don't think that will be a reality. As much as Bears fans, Jets fans keep saying, we want the leader of men, Mike Vrabel, they're going to interview him. I don't see it happening. For me, Chicago is Ben Johnson or bust territory. They believe that the smoke that Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network has been putting out there, that Ben Johnson is interested in the Chicago opening, that Ben Johnson had interest last year if that job had opened, and that the Bears could be unleashing a full court press for the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. That, for me, is the most likely reality, and that's where the problem lies, Gus. What happens if Ben Johnson doesn't go to Chicago? Where do the Bears go from there? And so, I don't think the Mike Vrabel pipe dream is a reality. And so, therefore, if the Bears can't get Ben Johnson, the next three names I have on the list for them, because of leader of men, because of where this organization needs to go, Pete Carroll, John Gruden, and Cliff Kingsbury. So, I mean, that's why it's Ben Johnson or bust territory right now up in Chicago.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And another point on Vrabel, he can't really go home in terms of college ranks either, just because of the way Ohio State looked against Oregon in this college football semifinal. Like, it seems like Ryan Day's job is probably safe there. So there was some rumors of Vrabes going back to college and coaching Ohio State, but I'm assuming that's
more importantly, that means, that maybe Press Taylor could have a job at Ohio State if Ryan Day continues to be employed. But continue, Gus.
There you go. Well, he was on my list as for the Bears. No, not really. I actually had.
Come on.
I had Pete Carroll as my name to slot into the Bears because Adam Schefter did have some smoke about him a couple of weeks ago, saying that Pete Carroll is interested in becoming an NFL coach again, and he is interested in the Chicago Bears head coach vacancy. And I think that, like, on one hand, obviously you've got the first overall pick in Caleb Williams. And anytime you have a quarterback, but especially when you have a young quarterback who's at the beginning of his rookie deal and just beginning to develop, you want to have a guy that's there long-term, kind of like the way that we here in Jacksonville want a long-term guy with Trevor Lawrence, even if he already is onto his second contract. But, like, Chicago definitely needs both, where it's like you need someone to develop Caleb for sure, but you also need a leader of men. I forget, there was a Chicago Bears player who said that, and it was like read out loud during just a primetime football game.
Oh, it was Jalen Johnson, like straight up, Kaylee Hartung, like had a list of like, here's the guys I want us to interview. And I said to our coworker, Taylor Dahl, I'm like, how is this not tampering? Like, I understand you're a Bears fan and you're loving this, but like, how is this not tampering?
I think he said, like, number one needs to be a guy to help out Caleb, but it needs to also be a leader of men. So I agree that I think their number one choice is definitely going to be Ben Johnson, as is most of these teams, to be able to pair him up with Caleb Williams. But they also need some culture in there. Not that Ben Johnson can't provide that, but I feel like Pete Carroll just embodies culture, and just like his infectious, positive energy is just what that city or team could probably use. And I also feel like Caleb Williams is like a little bit on like a Russell Wilson watch, kind of, in that, like, do you really want to let him cook, or would it actually be best to protect him by running the ball 25 times and then let him be creative, but kind of just keep him to a minimum? I'm not sure if Caleb has shown this season that he's the kind of guy that you'd want to be dropping back with 30 plus times the way that Geno Smith is able to in Seattle. So I don't know. So I think that would be just an interesting comparison if Pete Carroll did end up going there. But I feel like Bears fans, even if they probably want Ben Johnson first, if I were a Bears fan, I'd probably be pretty happy with Pete Carroll.
Yeah. And I do want to note, I see Michelle in the comments on Facebook. Shout out to Dell. Happy New Year to you and everybody else as well. For those of you listening live right now on our YouTube, Facebook, and X broadcast, we are going to get to the Jaguars. Don't worry, in case you just tuned in, we are going to go around the entire carousel and we will land on Jacksonville, where both Gus Logue and I believe there will be a head coaching vacancy. I am also of the belief there will 98% be a general manager vacancy. That's not the intent of this podcast, but we will circle to it. So don't worry, folks. With that said, though, Gus, Are we taking Ben Johnson off the board for the Jacksonville Jaguars already? Because for Chicago, this has to be Ben Johnson or bust territory? Or you think that the Pete Carroll idea is actually a potential reality?
I think that Pete Carroll is probably their backup plan, but I think it's definitely a potential reality. So I've got Pete Carroll written down on my list. And so do you
Okay.
want to? We're gonna have two
You've got
different
Pete.
lists now.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to put 1A, 1B because I think it's going to be one or the other for me. And again, we let off, for those of you who are just tuning in on this fine Thursday morning, the Mike Vrabel idea. We're going to get to Mike Vrabel because he is going to get a job this cycle, but it will not be Chicago. And thus the leader of men notion that you keep hearing out of there, it's got to be Pete then.
I think so too. All right, what do you want to hit next between Raiders, Saints, Jets?
Let's go with the three that already have openings. So let's go from Chicago. Let's go up to New York. Let's go to Florham Park, the New York Jets. Another team that, as I noted, certainly if only their fan base, if not those coming out of the building, have noted that they need a leader of men. The idea of would they take a defensive-minded head coach after just having a defensive-minded head coach and, quite frankly, a leader of men in Robert Saleh? Yes, the reality is they could just go exactly the same route as they did, but with an asterisk to that, Gus. The name I have for New York right now, the name that they should be making the full court press for, is Aaron Glenn. He's a former player. He was part of an all-decades team, was drafted by the New York Jets. For him, he has already, and we've heard it through multiple channels, whether that's Rich Cimini of ESPN, Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network, both of whom, when I was a college student interning in the New York area, those guys were on the beat back then. Aaron Glenn had already hung up the cleats, but at the same time, the point is that this is a guy who still has ties to the New York area. There is this idea that we were talking about with Mike Vrabel in New England, this idea of Aaron Glenn goes home and he restores the Jets, not only where he began his playing career, Gus, he also began his post-playing career as a scout with the New York Jets. He still has ties to the organization. For me, it's a slam dunk. Yes, you are literally going from one defensive coordinator in Robert Saleh to another defense coordinator in Aaron Glenn, both first-time head coaches. But this one, again, is different because he has played and worked in the organization. Woody Johnson went on the record a few weeks ago and made a comment about how he loves former players entering the coaching ranks. For me, that's all the smoke I need to see to know that the Jets have Aaron Glenn circled as priority number one. They're not going to get Mike Vrabel for all the same reasons I outlined with Chicago because of too many hands in the cookie jar. And Mike Vrabel is not going to want that smoke. Maybe Pete Carroll here too? I'm looking at the two most chaotic situations, and I'm like, maybe Pete would be willing to enter that fray. But for me, it's Aaron Glenn or bust here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think you laid it out perfectly, and I don't disagree at all. The name that I had down was Cliff Kingsbury, just because of Woody Johnson, basically, where I feel like the move is definitely to get the quote-unquote leader of men and to build a culture and to make it kind of a long-term project and a long-term rebuild, as it should be. But Woody Johnson has shown that he's clearly one of the most impatient owners in the league. And so I just think it would be funny, really, if despite not really having their quarterback of the future on the roster, or I say not really, they definitely don't have their quarterback of the future on the roster, but it would be funny to me if Woody Johnson still went out and got a quote-unquote quarterback whisperer in Cliff Kingsbury, who I feel like is more of a break glass in case of emergency type of guy that you bring in to help develop your quarterback if there's not a lot of other options. Kind of like how Washington really wanted Ben Johnson, but then they ended up getting with Dan Quinn along with Cliff Kingsbury. And so I think you're right about everything you said about Aaron Glenn, and I think that probably should be the betting favorite for where he goes. But I've got him going in a different spot. And so, again, I just thought it would be funny to see Cliff end up being hired as the next head coach of the New York Jets.
I mean, the funny part is that Cliff has already been listed for two potential openings, or two openings that are he is a potential candidate for two openings that already exist. And I don't look back at his time with the Phoenix Cardinals, for those of you who know the program. I don't look back at that time and I say, oh yeah, that guy's a total slam dunk as a head coach. I think he's a great play caller, but yes, that's where, again, that leader of men notion that is such a buzzword this time of the year. That's where I'm like, but I agree. I'm here for the content and here for the bit with the Jets because that's purely what they are at this point. I do want to note right now, the Jets are the only general manager opening in the National Football League. And I think that's very important not just because of the situation here in Jacksonville. We'll circle back to that here in a second, but because there are some other teams that, according to Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated, potentially could make a move. I did hear a little bit earlier this week about one of those two teams firsthand, and that's the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, when you lose to the New York Giants and you now screw the pooch, not only for them with their, projected number 1 overall pick, but also for them, for the Colts to be eliminated from the postseason. Gus, Dave Caldwell and Trent Baalke have more AFC South titles than Chris Ballard since he was named general manager of the Colts in 2017. And
That's right.
so that is where I look at the situation, knowing the Jets are the only opening right now. And whether you're Indianapolis, whether you're Jacksonville, or if you, yes, Del, you got it. You took the words out of my mouth. Chris Greer with the Miami Dolphins, who has also been the general manager since the Barack Obama administration. That says to me that those owners are considering, hey, does anyone really want to work with Woody Johnson? No. If I'm going to get one of these prime general manager candidates that's available this cycle, I need to create that opening, even if I have a slight notion of this is not going to end well with my current general manager, because I know my name, my organization would go to the top of the list in terms of viability among those candidates because I don't have Woody Johnson in the building. And so that is where I expect the Jets to hire a retread. Obviously, they've hired the 33rd team as a consulting group to hire both their head coach and their general manager. My name right now is John Dorsey for them, just because I think if they are especially to go with a we're going back to the future, Gus.
I just haven't heard, and that makes sense. I just haven't heard that name in a little bit.
Yeah, we're going back to the future because I do have the Jets hiring Aaron Glenn, a first-time head coach, and so I do think that the 33rd team will advise the New York Jets to go with a veteran, established, previous general manager, much like they advised last year the Washington Commanders. Granted, I think in a perfect world, and no one in Washington will ever admit this, in a perfect world, they would have had Adam Peters, a first-time GM, and Ben Johnson, a first-time head coach. But as soon as that went south and Mike McDonald stuck around in Seattle after his interview, they said, you know what, we will pair that first-time GM with a previous head coach in Dan Quinn. I expect the inverse in New York.
That makes a lot of sense. I am curious who your kind of 5th head coach is going to be in terms of, because I've got Pete Carroll. I mean, maybe he's not a sure thing, but to me, Pete Carroll, Aaron Glenn, Mike Vrabel, and Ben Johnson, I'm kind of expecting to land jobs. And then we have a 5th team. And so my 5th guy was Cliff Kingsbury. So I struggled a little bit to come up with like who just the next guy would be. So I'm interested to see who it might end up being for you. But we can take the conversation down south to New Orleans. Definitely praying for that city after the tragedy that happened on New Year's Day. Pretty just awful. But I have Aaron Glenn coming here because you definitely broke down his history with the Jets, but he is from New Orleans. That's his hometown. And so they are definitely, I feel like, in the same boat of looking for a culture guy and someone who's a leader of men. Again, they don't really have they do have Spencer Rattler, but we'll see if he's the quarterback of their future or not. But just the hometown connection made a lot of sense to me. The same with the fit, but I am interested in your take on their general manager situation. If you think that Mickey Loomis is going to be fired anytime soon, or if he just has some kind of secret family history or secret family secret.
No, Mickey Loomis will be here because we love to joke in my household about Sheila Ford, who they showed during the broadcast of Sunday's game against, or Monday night's game, against the San Francisco 49ers. It was funny because I was like, see, she's not that old, Kevin. She's not propped up in a corner. Her mother was propped up in a corner, and Gail Benson is propped up in a corner right now. And that's with all due respect to both of those lovely ladies who are controlling owners of National Football League teams and make way more money than I do and are way more powerful than I am. But the point is that Gail Benson and the Benson family love to keep things in-house in the family. That's why I don't believe Mickey Loomis is going anywhere. Certainly, if Mickey Loomis was to bid adieu, then I think everything that I'm about to say goes out the window and it's fair game. But I think that as long as the Benson family is the controlling owner of the New Orleans Saints, Mickey Loomis will be there. And in turn, they're going to seek someone who has some sort of tie to the organization. because I already have Aaron Glenn off the board to the New York Jets, I am going with Joe Brady, the offense coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, a legend in Louisiana after what he was able to do with the 2019 National LSU Championship team led by Joe Burrow. And while, yes, they do not have a quarterback outside of Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler, the expectation would be that Joe Brady is more than just a quarterback whisperer. Look at what his bread and butter has been in Buffalo. He's reinvented himself. He has been all about the run game and establishing a solid run game that allows for Josh Allen to have less pressure on himself to be the battering ram that we know he can be, but that in turn takes such a toll on his body. And so I believe that Joe Brady, because of his ties to the Louisiana area, is the front runner for this job. I think he's also a young, dynamic name that, quite frankly, they haven't gone young dynamic since Sean Payton back in 2006. So that is where I think Brady is a logical name for the Saints. Also, I think because Aaron Glenn worked for Dennis Allen, the Saints just fired Dennis Allen. There's a chance in my world in which Dennis Allen replaces Aaron Glenn in Detroit as the defense coordinator there as well. So that would truly be literally copy and pasting what you just went through, albeit with a former player and a guy who's from the area as opposed to Dennis Allen. But yeah, that's why for me, I think they go offense. And if they can't land Joe Brady, who I don't think is going to be as hot a name with any of these other openings right now, then I think that they will keep Darren Rizzi, quite frankly. And I don't agree with that, but I think that this is an organization that, for those of you, of course, who are Jaguar fans in the comments, you love to complain about, we never do the right thing. Quite frankly, the Saints have not done the right thing in quite some time as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if, much like the Raiders a year ago, they say, you know what, Darren Rizzi brought fire. He brought energy to this young squad. They give him a chance. I'm not in favor of hiring interims because 9 times out of 10, it's proven that it's lightning in a bottle and it's not sustainable. But aside from that, I really don't know where else the Saints could go if they are so focused on keeping it in-house with someone who has ties to New Orleans.
Well, I feel like Liam Cohen would be a pretty great hire for them because it would give them kind of a new voice and obviously a bright, young offensive guy, but also he works for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so it'd kind of be a two birds, one stone kind of situation to be able to get certainly a future head coach in Liam Cohen, even if he doesn't get a job this cycle, be able to snag him away from a division rival would be cool. But I mean, clearly, as you're saying, the Saints are wanting to get an in-house hire. And so Joe Brady makes a lot of sense. And I think that Joe Brady getting a job before Liam Cohen does also makes a lot of sense just in general, because Cohen, I feel like, needs like another year or two. Not that he needs it himself, but like the league needs to see another year or two from him in Tampa Bay and just in the professional ranks. And I think Joe Brady has just been doing it, not even necessarily longer, but just his name has been out there for longer because of LSU. And he's obviously done great things with the Bills. And so I think that Cohen has done a more impressive job in Tampa Bay by elevating the Baker Mayfield-led offense. But like still, the job that Joe Brady has done in Buffalo has been fantastic. I was pretty pessimistic, or at least just not feeling great for Buffalo about their offense after losing Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, because I got what their theory of like replacing them in the aggregate, like basically like Moneyball, but they didn't have really a home run hitter or at least a vertical threat. And so I thought everything was going to be just kind of like shrunken and kind of be like it has been in Jacksonville for a couple of years pre Brian Thomas Jr., where opposing secondary players can play a lot closer to the line of scrimmage because there's not really any threat to get behind them. But Joe Brady has been able to work around that problem and has led Buffalo to a great season where Josh Allen's the front runner. And so I feel like I've had Cliff Kingsbury down, but Joe Brady probably is the next guy up to be a head coach, I feel like, after Ben Johnson.
Yeah, and I do have Liam getting an interview with the Saints. And I think he's a fascinating candidate that certainly when we get to the Jacksonville Jaguars on this carousel of potential coaching hires, I think we will circle back to him. But I do think that, yes, to your point, he's still a young quote unquote name in that he's only been a play calling offensive coordinator for one season. He was the offense coordinator for Sean McVay, but he obviously did not call plays. We'll get back to him in a bit, but I do think there is a larger body of work that parallels, but is a little different than Joe Brady that could make him an actual hire this offseason cycle.
All right, let's move on to Las Vegas. I have a feeling we're going to have the same guy for this one, just via process of elimination. But
One,
what's your
2, 3. Mike Vrabel.
Braves? Yeah, it seems. I don't know who it was, or it was someone that came on the Pat McAfee show. I think Dan Orlovsky went on and said like there's somewhere, or Mike Vrabel like knows where he's going to be coaching next year. Basically, like the way that Dan put it was like it was already set in stone, and so now at this point, I think it is Las Vegas. He can kind of reunite with his former Super Bowl winning teammate Tom Brady, who's not the majority stakeholder, but has a pretty significant minority stake in the ownership group there for the Raiders. And so that seems like it would be an opportunity to turn the culture around for sure. But I am interested in what your take is on the general manager just situation there, because they've got Tom Telesco, who's like basically the Trent Baalke of the West. Like it's not good. And I feel
He's
for
just a
Raiders
little more
fans.
cuddly. He's slightly more cuddly than one Trent Baalke.
He's not great. And so I wonder how soon they might move on from him, or if Vrabel would be willing to work with him.
I can tell you from my knowledge, Tom Telesco will be back as the general manager of the Las Vegas Raiders. And this is a beautiful opportunity for Mike Vrabel, because Tom Telesco essentially is going to be his henchman. He's going to be, I don't want to use the word puppet because that's offensive in that regards, because I think Tom Telesco is going to manage the roster and the cap situation and provide insight and manage players, this, that, and the other. But the roster control that Vrabel saw in Tennessee, or at the very least some semblance of it, even if there is a general manager and that is their primary responsibility, he is going to get that with the Las Vegas Raiders. And part of it that I'm curious to see is, does Tom Brady, as our friend Pete Prisco of CBS Sports has hinted at, does Tom Brady leave the booth and become a EVP or more of a day-to-day hands-on executive with the Las Vegas Raiders, besides being the minority owner? And in turn, would he have a say? I don't think he's going to be in the building every single day. I just think he's calling the shots from afar. I do think that, again, this is a situation where Mike Vrabel would have an opportunity to essentially call the shots. Tom Telesco is going to do whatever he asks him to do, because Tom Telesco is in his second job as a general manager. And quite frankly, you don't get a third job as a general manager in the National Football League. You don't get fired twice and get a third job. And so I think he's going to do whatever it takes to maintain that job. And that includes answering to Mike Vrabel and Tom Brady.
Makes a ton of sense. I don't really have anything else to add, honestly.
I have
right
something. Now, are you ready? You're going to get a kick out of this. Here's the order. Here is the order of the Las Vegas Raiders. If Mike Vrabel, I see Brian and Robert and a couple others in the comments. Thank you guys for joining. And I see Brian saying that, Mike Vrabel should go to the Bears. Go back and listen to us on demand. We led with the Bears, and that's not happening. Mike Vrabel. And if for some reason he says no, Gus, Brian Flores. If he says no, now mind you, that's back-to-back Patriot way, guys. Cliff Kingsbury, I think, is a logical third ask if you're the Las Vegas Raiders. They did try to interview him last cycle for their offense coordinator position. They had a deal allegedly in place, and then something at the 11th hour didn't click, and thus Cliff Kingsbury did not sign as the OC with the Las Vegas Raiders, but therefore they are familiar with him. They've interviewed with him, so that would be the third call. I do think Liam Cohen will get some traction here. I do think that there could be some interest, especially knowing that the Raiders are probably going to either be bringing in a young quarterback or drafting a young quarterback. And so I think he would get an interview there as well. But again, much like how we said the Bears are Ben Johnson or bust, in my estimation, the Jets are Aaron Glenn or bust. I do think that the Las Vegas Raiders are Mike Vrabel or bust.
The nice thing about being Mike Vrabel or bust is that he's available right now. He's not working for a team. And so
As of Monday.
So I feel like, I don't know if you can officially hire him this coming Tuesday, but you can make the move pretty quickly, which is really big because obviously Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are both coaching the Lions, who seem like they're on the way to the Super Bowl. It feels like this is their year kind of team, even despite all the injuries that they have. And then Joe Brady's with the Bills. And so like these guys are going to be, or teams that want to hire Ben Johnson, but also Aaron Glenn are going to be waiting around. And we've already said that the Bears and the Jets and probably the Jags too are in like a do or die situation for one guy. And so for the Raiders, it feels like that's maybe the safest prediction, at least the safest that I feel comfortable with, because he is available right now, because he has that Patriots way connection with Tom Brady, because Tom Telesco clearly isn't a threat, which is good news for Las Vegas.
Well, to be clear, Gus, he can interview right now. The Raiders are still going to have to go through protocol, go through the Rooney Rule. They are going to have to interview multiple candidates, if only to check a box, a la Shad Khan, circa the Urban Meyer coaching search. Robert Saleh was interviewed here in Jacksonville that cycle, a couple other candidates as well. So I don't think it could be as simple as they fire Antonio Pierce on a Monday and Mike Vrabel is hired on a Tuesday, as much as many people around the league would believe that that's a done deal, like you alluded to, Dan Orlovsky. I do think they could fire Antonio Pierce on a Monday morning and have Mike Vrabel in the building interviewing Monday afternoon. That I do believe absolutely is in play next week.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks for clearing that up. Now we can get down here to Jacksonville, where I believe Ben Johnson will be the next head coach, just because there's been so much smoke around it. And like Pete Prisco is one of the guys that's been on it forever. Albert Breer had a recent column where he didn't necessarily point Ben Johnson in the Jaguars' direction, but he did say that Ben Johnson might not be that interested in the Chicago job, but there's obviously just going to be a ton of rumors on both sides floating around that situation. Chad Forbes said that the worst kept secret in the league is Ben Johnson going to Jacksonville. And I don't think we should take anything that Chad Forbes says for truth. I've been saying that for a few years, but at the same time, when it's gotten to this level where everyone's talking about it, I feel good about it, where I think that if what we both assume, we're both, I think 99.999% sure that the head coach spot will be open in Jacksonville and 98% sure that the GM spot will be open. And so in that circumstance, I think that the Jaguars are the best landing spot for any potential head coach. And I think including Ben Johnson. So I'm expecting Ben Johnson to be the guy. I'm ready to be heartbroken, but what say you, Mia?
Ben Johnson will be interviewing here in Jacksonville. I can 100% assure you that. This is a two-horse race from everything that I've been told and what I've seen. And don't get me wrong, when I say two-horse race, I'm not to suggest that Mike Vrabel won't formally interview here. That's not to suggest that the Jags won't reach out to Aaron Glenn, that they won't reach out to a whole litany of candidates, because you have to, in the way that the NFL head coaching searches are set up. This is going to be either Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen as the next head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, with an asterisk of heaven forbid break glass in case of emergency. I think a third name I would throw out there would be Todd Monken. It will be an offensive minded head coach who is going to be the primary play caller. Shad Khan went on the record back in July when a lot of other things were being discussed. And, he said he'd made it known who he wanted the play caller to be for the 2024 season. And we all know that Doug Peterson defied him and still allowed Press Taylor to call plays and be the primary designer, if you may, of this offense. And so I look at this and I say, Shad Khan is saying, I need someone who's going to be that offensive guru, be that quarterback whisperer that takes Trevor Lawrence, my largest financial asset outside of the reimagined Everbank Stadium, to the next level. Yes, Ben Johnson is going to get an interview. Ben Johnson also did interview in Jacksonville as a position coach in 2021 here with the Jaguars. There is some familiarity there. I have said for weeks now, I don't know Ben Johnson personally, and I'm speaking with people around the league, and yes, I believe there's interest here in the Jacksonville Jaguars and coaching Trevor Lawrence. I don't know who was in that interview in 2021 and who will be here when he interviews in the next few weeks. I've said it for weeks that because I don't know him personally, I don't want to speak out of turn. I've heard from multiple people, though, he is a quirky guy. And that's not a bad thing, because Jim Harbaugh is quirky. And Jim Harbaugh is the perfect fit out in LA. Mike McDaniel is quirky, and he is the perfect fit in Miami right now, the GM situation withstanding. And so that is the only thing that I look at, and I wonder, in terms of, again, the leader of men, can you stand in front of a room? We don't know that for any of these offense coordinators. Someone I saw in the chat brought that up. We don't know with any of these coordinators if they can actually lead the offensive, defensive, and special teams phases all together. We don't know that for certain, because a lot of them haven't had the opportunity to do so. But that is where a lot of my reservations come. But I would totally accept a Ben Johnson hire. The Liam Cohen situation, there's interest. I can assure you of that. There is interest in Jacksonville. And I think that what is so fascinating about Liam is that comparatively to Ben Johnson is a bit of an anomaly in that he came from the Adam Gase tree, but he has a bunch of different influences. He played in North Carolina. He has some interest in some influences there. And so then you look at Liam Cohen, and that's not to say he doesn't have influences as well, but what he does have is that Sean McVay tie. And he spent 2018 to 2021 out in Los Angeles, learned at the foot of Sean McVay, has that tree and has that influence. And more than anything, Gus, I think what we need to talk about when it comes to Sean McVay, it's not just, oh, he has the Sean McVay rub. It's that Sean McVay evolved during the time that Liam Cohen has worked with him on and off for the last 7 years. We have seen Sean McVay go from creating the greatest show on turf in 2018 to a young offense last season that was highlighted by young players across the board who otherwise you didn't even know who they were. Puka Nacua goes on the 5th round. A team that never really relied on the run after Todd Gurley's demise, saying, you know what, we're going to be smash mouth football. We're no longer this athletic zone blocking team. We're okay with running duo. We're okay with going 5 straight up in your face and trying to get push at the line of scrimmage. And that is where I look at Liam Cohen and the ability to run the ball in Tampa that just hasn't existed for the better part of this decade, and how he has reinvented that in a year's time. And I look at how he was able to create Will Levis into, or at least somehow prop up Will Levis as a 1st-round pick. And then he looked awful the year that Liam went back to LA. And I say there has to be something here, right? So to your point earlier of Joe Brady has a larger resume, has a more in-depth resume perhaps than Liam Cohen. I think they're on the same footing, quite frankly. And I think Liam may even have a leg up. And I think part of that is because he has gone multiple places compared to Ben Johnson, compared to even Joe Brady, because Joe Brady, obviously his time in Carolina, we saw how that went as the OC for Matt Rule. Oh, I blanked on Matt Rule's name there. And so this is a guy who went and was in a completely different situation in Kentucky, was in a completely different situation in Tampa, made both those quarterbacks successful, made both of those run games successful, was the OC in LA when Baker Mayfield took a flight from Carolina and had to learn the playbook on 3 days' time in order to play on Thursday Night Football, and was able to get him ready for that game. And so that's just where I think the resume is there. And that's where I do think that it's a fascinating situation, especially coupled with, since some of you are asking in the comments, the general manager vacancy and where the Jaguars could go from there.
Mm-hmm. To be clear, I think that Cohen is ready. I'm just thinking that maybe some NFL owners are out there thinking that they want to see another year or two, but he certainly doesn't need it. The Ben Johnson obviously does a great job with a run game too, but it's a little bit difficult to kind of separate him from just the talent that they have in that unit, and then also the coaching that unit has received. But Cohen in Tampa Bay has been so impressive, because I thought that the Bucs were no way going to make the playoffs. We're definitely going to regress this year because Dave Canales was hired away as their offense coordinator, and then head coach of the Carolina Panthers. And I wasn't sure how he was going to work out in Carolina, but I knew that he did a great job last year. And so I didn't know much about Cohen, but I was just kind of assuming natural regression would come. But instead, it's been the opposite. They've just completely continued to go in the right direction, and a large part of it is because of Cohen's work with the offensive line and with the run game. And that's definitely, as much as Jacksonville needs someone to kind of help mold Trevor Lawrence and be paired with Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas long term, you definitely want someone who can get the most out of the running game, because then that in turn can get the most out of Trevor Lawrence, which I know we've both said before. But yeah, it's music to my ears, though, that those are the two top guys, because even taking the names and the people out of it, just the process of, I wanted Doug to call his plays and he didn't, and I'm pissed about that. And I want this next guy to call his own plays and to take kind of control of that situation, and just with the larger part again to be paired with Trevor long term. If it's one of those two guys, I'll be pretty excited to cover this team for next year and beyond.
And yes, since I see Nasir asking, I don't feel out of line to tell you that if there is an opening in Jacksonville, which again, Gus and I believe there will be a head coaching vacancy in Jacksonville, I've been told that both of those individuals have some form of interest in a vacant Jacksonville Jaguars opening. Now, the general manager situation, like we said off the top of the show, for those of you who tuned in a little bit late live, and of course, this whole episode will be available on demand once we're done. We're both 98%. I think that's kind of where we're at when it comes to an open GM spot here in Jacksonville. We're about 98%. Correct, Gus?
Correct.
Yes. We're about 98%. The name that will be the top name, regardless of the landing spot this GM cycle, is going to be Ian Cunningham, the assistant general manager of the Chicago Bears. He already has turned down 2 jobs before in both the Tennessee Titans and the Arizona Cardinals. Those jobs went to Rand Carthen and Monty Ossenfort, respectively. He has not only ties to the Baltimore Ravens, where he began his career, but also the Philadelphia Eagles, where he also worked. And I think that if you are looking to pull someone from one of those 2 trees, Gus, where there has been such success, he is the obvious next candidate. He's been around the league. The notion is that he's easy to work with, whether you're a player, an agent, a coach. And so that's going to be the top name. And that's where I think, again, if you are the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Indianapolis Colts, the Miami Dolphins, and you are debating, or you are already 98% confirmed you are going to make a change, and you look at the only other GM vacancy right now with the New York Jets and Woody Johnson and the circus that is, and you have to say to yourself, okay, if I can line myself up and I believe that Ian Cunningham really is that guy and I can be at the top of his list, then I need to make that move to create that opportunity.
It'll be very exciting to see how all these changes play out. Just to recap, I'm predicting that the Jaguars hire Ben Johnson, the Raiders hire Mike Vrabel, the Saints hire Aaron Glenn, the Jets hire Cliff Kingsbury, the Bears hire Pete Carroll. Mia thinks that the Bears will hire either Ben Johnson or Pete Carroll. The Jets will hire Aaron Glenn. The Saints will hire Joe Brady. The Raiders will hire Mike Vrabel, and the Jaguars will hire one of Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen. Mia, great stuff. Appreciate you coming on. My last question for you is just to hit on Colts Jaguars at least a little bit. You want to give a scoregami score prediction, or just a score prediction for this game?
What's the line at now? It was at 5 when we made our picks on helmets and heels on Tuesday. That's what I'm curious. I'm just curious because, like, I saw that line and that's such a massive number, Gus, and not that we want to go solely based off the betting lines. But that says to me that those dudes out in the desert don't think the Jaguars are really caring all that much. It's still at 5 in favor of the Colts. I think I picked the Colts on helmets and heels because I was trying to pick up a game in our standings, but I see a world where the Jags cover that number, but the Colts win. I think the Colts are playing, as we talked about off the top, for Chris Ballard's job. Not that the players would probably care all that much. We did get some interesting insight on helmets and heels on Tuesday from Angela Morian, who covers the Colts out in Indianapolis, that one of the biggest critiques after that loss to the Giants was like Kenny Moore and Zaire Franklin basically like walking and jogging around on the field in the midst of a game that ended up being somewhat competitive in the second half at MetLife Stadium. And like, that's where she said, it's not even like young players where you can be like, oh, they don't know. It's literally the 2 senior defensive captain veteran guys on that side. And that's where I wonder what's going on in Indy outside of probably Gus Bradley being on the chopping block. So let's take the Jags to cover, Colts to win. Colts 16, Jaguars 13. Not scoregami. So Colt, you know what? Jags 12. Jags 12. There's some scoregami.
We are right in sync because I have Colts 17, Jaguars 13. I do think the Colts will win, but I certainly don't think they'll be good enough to win by more than 1 score. I think it'll be another gritty, gross, low-scoring game in classic 2024 Jaguars fashion. But hopefully we'll have a lot to look forward to in the 2025 season. But me and I will be back on Sunday to break down what we see from that game, along with Hacker and Tommy McManus. And then, like I said on Tuesday's show, I'm not sure exactly what the plans are for Duval Rundown going forward, but we will be back throughout the entire offseason.
We may be doing an instant reaction pod on Monday, not to throw that audible at you guys, or maybe Sunday night. But we're gonna be wheels at the ready, at the steering wheel. We'll be ready with whatever happens next week.
Yeah, we'll be here, so hopefully you'll be joining us here. But thank you to everyone who has been joining us. Thanks to Mia again for joining today, and we'll be back on Sunday. So have a good one, everyone.